guys, I'm Janet on occasion, and today we're going to be talking about the elves again in another history video. So, slight disclaimer, it's been months since the last one, maybe 2 months, and I recorded most of this episode about 6 weeks ago, but I finished it now, and yeah, so if you haven't seen the first episode, because, you know, you've come to this channel in the last 6 weeks, then yeah, you should definitely check out episode 1, because this starts after, you know, a pretty big chapter in in Elven history. So there'll be a link in the description, seeing as how it's been so long since the first one, and there will be a brief recap for those who did watch the first one. So yeah, let's get on with it. So this is part 2. In part 1, we learned about Caledor and Aenarion and how they sort of united the elves in their fight against chaos when they turned up, when the polar gates collapsed. And that was a bad time. You know, they'd been living in peace up until then. And then suddenly, yeah, demons everywhere, which, you know, that's enough to ruin a picnic. So, yeah, so we learned all about Aenarion and his awesome dragon mount in Draugr, and how they fought off 4 greater demons in order to give Caledor and his wizards enough time to create that massive vortex to siphon off the chaos energy in the world and banish all those demons. So that's pretty swell. You know, glad he did that, because, you know, I could do without demons running everywhere, frankly, and I'm sure you could too. So the 2 of them didn't do this on their own. I mean, they sort of did, but also sort of not really. They, Aenarion especially, he had the power of the gods on his side. He became the first Phoenix King by throwing himself into the fire of Aenarion, and Aenarion, you know, bestowed him with his power. So he sort of became basically the avatar of an elven god, which is pretty impressive. But then he got told the news that his kids were killed, that his kids had died, and his wife. So he obviously went a bit mad, and decided to start, you know, using the Sword of Cain, which is the, you know, the sword of the god of murder, which is pretty grim. So, you know, but it was very good for killing lots and lots and lots and lots of chaos. So, you know, that worked out okay. But unfortunately, having, you know, lost his family, he ended up getting a new one. So he had a new wife, Morathi, and with her he had a son, Malekith. And so, although the Phoenix King is dead, as is the Ever Queen, there's a bit of a gap in power here. No one's really in charge anymore, but sort of a time of relative peace, and so, you know, they got a minute. But Malekith seems like the most obvious heir, being the son of Aenarion. So we'll see how that pans out. So let's begin. After the disappearance of Aenarion, the lands of Ulthuan were thrown into confusion. The Everqueen was dead, the Phoenix King was lost, and Dragon Prince Caledor was imprisoned forever on the Isle of the Dead, with the greatest and wisest of the High Mages. With the loss of their own leaders, the armies of Chaos were thrown into full retreat, and the elves swiftly hunted down and destroyed them. The land was at peace, but the Golden Age was lost forever. The coming of Chaos had taught the elves many bitter lessons. They vowed that never again would they be surprised by any foe. The land was ravaged, but there were now many strong realms in Ulthuan. Cities sprung into being around the old fortresses. Many of the old great elf towns date from this period, and it goes some way towards accounting for their remoteness. The princes of the realms decided that they needed someone to rally round and lead them in the event war should come again. The first council was called at the shrine of Aenarion, a year to the day after Aenarion disappeared. There it was revealed that the firstborn children of Aenarion still lived. Sensing impending doom, their mother had sent them to be hidden in the Gaian Vale. Lost on their way, they had been rescued from a chaos attack by the treeman Oakheart and his people. The treeman had kept them safe in the deepest wildwoods while war raged. Ivrain was ready to be crowned a new Everqueen. In her, the spirit of Asteriel would live on. So just to avoid any confusion, the treeman there, that doesn't signify that there are wood elves running around. That's actually an ancient forest on a little island in the middle of Ulthuan. And yeah, no wood elves yet. But there are still, you know, treemen running around. They're all over the world at this point. But yeah, so there are some who are still friendly to the elves, you know, living around Ulthuan. So that's kind of nice to know. So the obvious choice for the next Phoenix King was Malekith, Aenarion's son by Morathi. He had grown to be a mighty warrior, a great sorcerer, and an excellent general. He was fair and a persuasive speaker, with a natural talent for diplomacy and leadership. But there were those who remembered the cruel days of Aenarion's court in Nagaraith, and they doubted that any child who grew up there could be entirely wholesome. There were also those who remembered Caledor's words concerning the curse on the line of Aenarion, who thought it would be wise to remind others. So immediately, I've actually got to backtrack, because something I missed out in the previous one is Caledor actually was very against the use of the Sword of Cain. So I'm actually going to go back and give you, sort of that bit. So this is just prior to Aenarion taking the Sword of Cain. So Aenarion announced that he was going to the Blighted Isle. Dread filled those who heard his words. All of them knew that this could only mean one thing. Aenarion was going to draw the Sword of Cain, take up the Widowmaker to wield the ultimate and deadly weapon. So from the beginning of time it had waited, embedded in the great black altar of Cain on the Blighted Isle. The sword was old as the world and deadly as poison. A shard of the fatal weapon forged by Vul himself for the death god Caledor Cain. A fragment of crystallized death capable of slaying demons and gods alike. No mortal could wield it and live, but Aenarion had passed beyond hope and beyond despair. He lived to slay. Caledor knew that would happen and tried to warn Aenarion. He told Aenarion that he would be cursed if he drew the weapon, that such power was too great for any mortal being, and it could only be bought at the price of Aenarion's immortal soul. And so, later on when they're considering Malekith as an heir, they obviously think, well, he was born after Aenarion drew the Sword of Cain, so he, like Aenarion, would be cursed. So, sort of points against him there, for his election campaign. So, skipping forward again, still others desired a marriage between the two thrones to symbolise the renewal of the Elf Kings and the unity between the old rulers and the new. It was pointed out that Malekith was hardly suitable for this. Ever fair-spoken, Malekith said that he desired the kingship not for himself but in honour of the memory of his father. However, if the princes did not call upon him to serve, it was of no matter. He would willingly do homage to whoever was selected. The princes thought this handsomely said and took him at his word. From their own number they chose Bel Shanaar, Prince of Tiranoc, an elf who had distinguished himself in the war and yet was seen as a voice of peace and reason. Morathi shrieked her protests at her son not being chosen, but he calmed her and agreed that the selection was a good one. He was the first to bend his knee to the future Phoenix King, which seems pretty cool of him, I might say. Elf astrologers and geomancers studied the portents to divine the best time for the new king to begin his reign, and calculate the best time for him to pass through the flame. On the day of his coronation, the priests of Aenarion chanted the warding spells that enabled Bel Shanaar to pass unscathed through the flame. The Phoenix Guard, survivors of those warriors who had witnessed the ascension of Aenarion, waited beyond the flame to drape the newly woven feathered cloak of kingship around his shoulders. Malekith's voice was the first to be raised in acclamation. So I think it's important to point out here, actually, that this is all happening in the imperial calendar year of minus 4419. So that's, 6,000 years ago. So yeah, it really proves, Elven history is a long history. So, next bit. So began the great days of exploration and building. In the initial centuries of Bel Shanaar's long reign, the elves busied themselves, rebuilding their land and exploring the surrounding world. Elf ships raced across the seas and charted the coast of the new continents. Colonies were planted in Lustria, the New World, and the Old World. Contact was established with the dwarves, and a great era of trade and friendship began. The people began to recover from the horrors of the Long War with chaos, and for a while the population grew. Bel Shanaar, a seaman and one of wondrous skill, personally visited all the new colonies and even ventured to Karak in the World's Edge Mountains to swear the oath of friendship with the dwarf kings. Malekith became his personal ambassador here, and thus were sown the seeds of tragedy. In this age the elves spread and multiplied, wealth flowed back to Ulthuan, and great were its riches. The cities were beautiful and adorned with all the fine things of the globe, and though the folk did not realise, slowly, softly, and insidiously, chaos returned. It came back in the form against which there could be no defence. No army could turn it back from the borders, no weapon could be wielded against it. It came back in the form of the cult of Slaanesh. As newfound wealth arrived, the elves became ever more indolent and luxury-loving. Yet for a long time, the cult of pleasure was respectable, and none connected it with the hidden worship of chaos. Meanwhile, Malekith had begun his many journeys and won renown. In the colonies, he led successful armies against the orcs and the remnants of chaos. He ventured to the Blighted Isle in search of his father's armour. It is said that he stood transfixed before the altar of Cain, and even laid his hand on the hilt of the great weapon. To him it appeared as a sceptre, not as a sword. and perhaps he took this as a sign. Of his father and of Draupnir, he found no trace. His expedition took him ever onward to the cold colonies of the northern New World. Here in the rubble of the abandoned pre-human city, he found the Circlet of Iron, a talisman of awesome sorcerous power. On his return, he found an island in the grip of suspicion. The cult of pleasure was strongest in Nagaraith, his homeland and the site of his father's court. His mother, the Lady Morathi, had long ago been a devotee of the cult. Indeed, legend has it she was one of its founding members, and was its high priestess. The Phoenix King was growing worried about the cult of luxury. Its excesses had already degenerated into the sacrifice of living beings, and its chaotic nature was increasingly evident. The dark name of Slaanesh was increasingly associated with it. Malekith was apparently horrified by what he found in Nagaraith. He denounced the entire coven of Slaanesh worshippers, including his mother, and handed them over to the Phoenix King. This was the last straw for the people of Nagaraith. They felt themselves the most slighted of the folk of Ulthuan. They had taken the brunt of battle during the war against Chaos, and yet they were reviled by their fellows. The princes had obviously refused to select their prince as Phoenix King, although he was obviously the rightful heir to Aenarion. Now the cult of pleasure was being persecuted by the agents of the distant Phoenix King. The realm became ever more rebellious and uncooperative with the Phoenix throne, and became a haven for the persecuted followers of the cult of pleasure. There was talk of enforcing the Phoenix King's edict against the cult by military force. Ulthuan teetered on the brink of civil war. Once again, Malekith stepped in. His loyalty to the king and his hatred of the cult was indisputable. He personally took charge of the war against the cult. A shroud of fear descended once more over Ulthuan. No one knew whether their neighbour was a member of the prescribed sect. The agents of the Phoenix King could appear at any time and drag away the most reputable people. It seemed that the servants of Slaanesh were everywhere. Malekith himself remarked that there was no telling how high the corruption might reach. Meanwhile, in Nagaraith, the worship of the cult of pleasure became ever more corrupt, frenzied and perverse. There was little the Phoenix King could do but finally declare war against one of his own realms. He called together his generals and summoned a council of war at the shrine of Aenarion. On the eve of the council, the worst of horrors was revealed. Malekith claimed that the Phoenix King himself was a secret worshipper of Slaanesh. Rather than face the shame of interrogation, the Phoenix King took poison. Malekith moved swiftly to restore order. Now, that seems a little bit abrupt, and yeah, that's not the whole story, because if I hop to the 8th edition rulebook here, it tells the same story, but slightly differently. To me, the earlier telling is more like the Phoenix King sort of taking, his own sort of fate into his hands. But in the more modern telling, so it says, military action against the cults seem inevitable. Malekith called Ulthuan's lords to a council of war at the shrine of Aenarion. On the eve of the council, the worst of horrors was revealed. Malekith claimed the Phoenix King himself was a secret member of one of the cults. Before Bel Shanaar could deny this, Malekith had him poisoned. And so I find that is kind of fun. How obviously poisoning people isn't fun, but I think it's fun how the telling has changed slightly. So at first, in the 4th edition High Elves book, the story might be the same, but it might be a different interpretation. It could be a more pride-filled thing of no, Bel Shanaar took his own life. Rather than, be sort of a victim of Malekith's, perverse pleasures, Whereas in the newer telling, it just outright says, nope, Malekith poisoned him. He murdered the Phoenix King. So I think it sort of shows how there's more of a sort of a vengeance sort of aspect to it, which is sort of dangerous for the High Elves, because, that sort of thinking is, revenge and all the rest of it. That's pretty close to the sort of the Dark Elves ethos, so I do like there's two different tellings. Obviously these were published probably 20 years apart, but, it is nice. Just one detail which really stands out to me, that they changed, because most of these tellings are the same, no matter where you read them from, but that one detail I think is very poignant. So I'm going to continue from 8th edition. With this act, Malekith had gone too far. No one could believe that the king had been a worshipper of the cults. Certainly not the assembled princes who had all known Bel Shanaar long and well. Too late, the light of suspicion fell on Malekith. He and his followers already had the shrine of Aenarion in their possession. The princes and their bodyguards were trapped within his grasp, and a secret treaty with his kin in Nagarath meant an army of cultists would impose Malekith's will on the leaderless elves. Believing that all he had to do was to crown himself and slay the princes to ensure his ascendance, Malekith marched into the sacred flame, confident that, like his father before him, he could endure the ordeal. He was wrong. The flame of Aenarion would not suffer his polluted body to pass through it. Thus did the flame that brought Aenarion miraculous rebirth bring nothing but ruin to his deceitful and treacherous son. Malekith was caught within the fire, his body terribly scarred and burned. It is said that his screams were so terrible that none who heard them could ever cast them from memory. Unable to pass through the flame, he managed to cast himself back onto the side of the platform he had entered from. His body was seared and blackened. Where once he had been beautiful, now he was hideous. Where once he had been mighty, now he was maimed. Where once he had been fair-spoken, now his voice was horrible, forced out by ravaged lungs through a ruined throat. Believing their leader on the verge of death and the vengeance of Aenarion about to descend upon them, his discouraged followers took up their leader's body and fled the shrine, leaving the best and the noblest of the elf princes dead within. An age of tragedy and conflict was about to begin. So I want to point out, despite Bel Shanaar, his reign seeming really short, actually that lasted 1669 years, which is, it's quite a long time for anyone to be ruling. So so he did do a lot of exploration and forge a lot of alliances, build a lot of cities. He did a lot of work, which I'm not sure this really reflects. But yeah, 1600 years. That's a long time. So at that point there were elves all over the world. So pretty cool. So this next bit is about the next Phoenix King, obviously. So once more, the elf realm were plunged into chaos. Malekith and his followers fled north to Nagarath. Leaderless, the elves did not pursue. Frantic consultations were held between the few surviving princes, the chief priest of the Shrine of Aenarion, and the captain of the Phoenix Guard. It was decided that there was only one elf capable of the task. The third Phoenix King was to be Imric, who upon his succession took the name Caledor I. He was the grandson of the famous mage of that name and brother to the murdered prince of the realm of Caledor. Although he lacked his grandsire's gift for magic, Caledor was a great warrior and general. At the time of the murders in the Shrine of Aenarion, he was hunting in Trace with his old friend Coradrel of Trace. Caledor was famously brusque and curt. When the messenger arrived at his camp bringing news of his call to the throne, all Imric said was, "Why?" And upon being told of the murders, he commented, "Bad. Very bad," which was considered quite long-winded for him. The messenger asked him what was going to happen. He simply replied, "War." War was indeed what happened. It was just after this moment that one of the most famous events in elf history took place. Malekith dispatched a band of assassins to slay the new Phoenix King. They arrived just after the messenger from the shrine, and jumped on Caledor by surprise. There were dozens of them, and they would have overpowered the future king, had not a band of Tracian hunters seen what was happening and intervened. These powerful mountain-dwelling elves leapt among the Nagarothi assassins and chopped them down with their great axes, saving Caledor's life. Afterwards, when told he had best wait for his bodyguard, Caledor replied that he could expect no better bodyguard than these hunters, and asked them to accompany him on his quest to the shrine. The hunters accepted, and thus were founded the famous White Lions of Trace, so called because they were garbed in the furs of the White Lion. Swiftly, Caledor took ship for the shrine. With full and proper ceremony, he walked through the sacred fire and was accepted as pure by the god Aenarion. He had no time for the ritual marriage with the Everqueen, since the legions of Nagarath had swept down from their grim realm, bearing the banner of Malekith before them. Caledor raised his own standard and called for all true elves to join him in defence of the realm. Civil war raged throughout Ulthuan. It was a period of great confusion and conflicting rumour. Brother fought brother. In the far realms and colonies, no one knew who the true king was. Some spoke for Caledor, some spoke for Malekith. Devotees of the cult of Slaanesh spread confusion everywhere. In strength, the two sides were equally matched. The elves of Nagarath were numerous and well-versed in sorcery, being descendants of those grim elves who had followed Aenarion after he took up the sword of Cain. There were no fiercer warriors among elven kind. Monsters were plentiful in the still magic-rich mountains of Nagarath, and these were captured and tamed by the Nagarothi. Their mountainous homeland with its fortress valleys was a near impregnable base from which to sally forth. At first, they were as organised and disciplined as their enemies were confused. However, the new Phoenix King could call on the mighty dragon riders of Caledor and the legions of the Phoenix Guard. Many elf communities in Tiranoc and Aenarion fell to the followers of Malekith, aided by traitors within their own gates. In Safari, even then a realm famed for its sorcerers, Wizard Prince fought Wizard Prince, for there were many in that land who had taken their magical researches too far, and into whose souls darkness entered. Slowly, as the followers of the Phoenix King gained the upper hand, these mighty mages fled to Nagarath and lent their strength to Malekith. Malekith himself recovered his strength and called his armourers to him. With the aid of the Saphirian wizards, and Hotek, a renegade priest of Vul, he forged a great suit of black armour, which would lend strength to his withered and fire-blasted body. To the brow of its great horned helm was wielded the circlet of iron. On the day of its creation, he had his armourers fuse the suit directly to his body. After passing through the fires of Aenarion, even the infernal heat of their forges could not hurt him. After that day, those who looked upon Malekith shuddered, for he was a figure of dread. The armour was covered in vile and evil runes, which drew their power directly from the realm of chaos, and hurt and baffled the eyes of all those who looked upon them. On his shield was the rune of Slaanesh, whose patronage he claimed from his mother's side. On his sword was the rune of Cain, a reference to the blade wielded by the mighty sire Aenarion. Mounted on a fell steed, a dragon warped by the power of chaos, he was ready to lead his armies to war. Ever afterwards, Malekith was to be known as the Witch King. Fell he was, and many were his victories, but to no avail. Slowly and surely the truth of what had happened came out, and slowly and surely the elves rallied to the side of Caledor. Time and again, the new Phoenix King proved his cunning as a general. He sprang traps and ambushes on the Witch King's forces. He crushed them on the open field of battle. The White Lions protected him from many assassination attempts, and his personal retinue of Saphirian wizards countered all death spells. Finally, at the field of Malekith, at the very entrance to the passes of Nagarath, Caledor faced the Witch King himself in battle, and defeated the mightiest of his armies, driving them into the marshes of Malekith. Malekith himself was forced to flee in a great black chariot, drawn by cold ones. His dragon had taken a mortal wound, as he and Caledor clashed on the battlefield. After this, the folk of Nagarath became ever more desperate, relying more and more on the blackest of sorceries for their defence. They called demons and allied with chaos, and so their evil was plain for all to see. Thus they came to be known as Dark Elves. But not all their black arts could save them now, and the full strength of Ulthuan was brought to bear. The Witch King decided on a final gamble. He gathered all the renegade magicians together and revealed a plan as mad as it was bold. They were going to undo the spells that held together the vortex and bring back chaos to the world. The demonic legions would march once more to the aid of their new allies. The Witch King and his fellows would draw on the power of chaos and become like unto gods. So far lost to sanity were many of the Dark Elves that they readily agreed. One, though, Arathian of Ular, saw it for the world-destroying madness that it was. In the middle of the night, he slipped away from the Witch King's palace and brought word to the Phoenix King. He was slain by a poisoned crossbow bolt fired by a Dark Elf assassin after bringing word to the Dark Elf's enemy. So began a last deadly conflict. The Witch King and his councillors began a terrible ritual that would unbind the vortex. The high mages of the elves attempted to stop them, but such was the power of the Witch King's magic that he slowly and inexorably gained the upper hand. The mountains shook and the earth trembled. Once more an eerie glitter sprang up over the mountains, and clouds of magical energies surged up from the erupting peaks into the sky. In the far north of the world, the realm of chaos churned and prepared to advance once more. In the camp of the Phoenix King, Caledor prayed to all the gods and to his grandsire to aid him. At dusk, as the sky shimmered with weird, many-coloured lights, the Witch King and his followers began their final push. The demons of chaos came to their aid, and the last spells of the defenders went down. In the sky, the triumphant laughter of the dark gods was heard. Then, As the Witch King's dark magic touched the Island of the Dead, the very heart of the vortex, new players entered the game. Mighty figures clad in light sent the surge of mystical power tumbling back to Nagarath. The trapped mages of the Isle of the Dead refused to let their work be undone. The colossal power of those energies lashed Nagarath. Many of the Witch King's coven fell stone dead. The land bucked and heaved like a terrified horse, and a storm of baleful magic raced over the land. Nothing could withstand the terrible forces unleashed. The earth itself buckled under the titanic stress, and across the island, continent earthquakes cast down the cities and levelled the mountains. A wall of water 1,000 feet high smashed down on Nagarath. The sea rushed in to cover all of Nagarath and most of Tiranoc besides. Tens of thousands were slain, drowned by waves, buried by earthquakes, struck by magical energy. The shock of the sinking was felt as far away as the World-End Mountains, and recorded in the chronicles of the Dwarf Kings. The power of the Witch King was reduced, but not broken. In those last hours, as the seas rushed in to devour the land, the mightiest of the sorcerer lords of Nagarath cast dark and terrible spells upon their keeps. As the waves crashed round the hilltops, the wizards' palaces broke free and floated on the surface of the waves. Large as icebergs, they drifted off to the north, carrying the remaining followers of the Witch King. Thus were created the infamous Black Arks of Nagaroth. The cataclysm destroyed much of what had been built up during the long reign of Bel Shanaar, and left the elves temporarily too weak to pursue their dark kinsfolk. The Black Arks made landfall in the bleak north of the New World, near where Malekith had found the Circlet of Iron. Their towers became the cause of new cities. A few Black Arks were left to patrol the stormy northern seas. There they drew the sea monsters cast up from the ocean bottom by the sinking of the land into the service of their evil master. The Dark Elves named their new land Nagaroth, after their old homeland. After a century, there began a long period of sea warfare and skirmishing over the north of Ulthuan. The Dark Elves sought to reclaim what was left of their old lands, and the High Elves sought to prevent them. Neither side had the strength to gain the mastery, and the Blighted Isle, where the Sword of Cain still rested, changed hands several times. It was during this period that Caledor oversaw the building of the fortresses at Griffin Gate, Phoenix Gate, Eagle Gate, Dragon Gate, and Unicorn Gate. He personally led the last expedition to the Blighted Isle and reclaimed it from the Dark Elves. It is said that he stood before the altar, and for a moment the blade called to him. He stood there for a time, head bowed, and in the end, simply said no. On the way home, Caledor's ship was separated from the rest of the High Elf fleet by a freak storm. It was attacked by Dark Elf reavers, who set the ship alight. Rather than fall into the hands of the Witch King's servants, he jumped into the sea in full armour. Thus passed Caledor the Conqueror. It was a bad end for a great king. Now, I know what you're thinking. If 4th edition is to be believed, then the rate of suicide among Phoenix Kings is dreadfully high. But yeah, so he managed to survive fairly solid 550 years as Phoenix King, which, isn't too bad, I guess. It's no Bel Shanaar, but, he was at war the entire time. So, pretty bad. So, the loss of Caledor I was a grievous blow to the elves. The old warrior had steered the realm of Ulthuan through its greatest crisis, and held the kingdom together when it could have easily splintered and been conquered. He had prosecuted a war against the Dark Elves. He had left the Phoenix King, the next Phoenix King, with a strong army, a secure line of fortresses in the north, and the most powerful navy in the world. Tragically, it was all for naught. The Council of Princes met at the Shrine of Aenarion. Remembering the events of the fatal Second Council, the strength of Phoenix Guard was doubled, and they were sworn to silence lest word of the prince's deliberations fall into the hands of spies. Seeking continuity, they chose Caledor's son, who was to become the Phoenix King, Caledor II, and taught the elf princes the folly of hereditary kinship. Where his father had been wise, Caledor was foolish. Where his father had been a great general, the son was rash and impetuous. Caledor II was vain, pompous, overweening, and bombastic. He shared only one of his father's gifts. He was a mighty warrior. But to an elf people desperate for stability, shocked to the very core by their sundering with the kin of Nagaroth, he promised a familiar hand at the tiller. His reign began well. The elf fleet cleared the northern seas of their Nagarothi kinsfolk. Trade routes lost during the Sundering were reopened. The elves once more made contact with the dwarves. Karazhan was then at the zenith of its power. This was the great age of dwarf civilization. Their runesmiths had codified all the many magical runes. Their alchemists were experimenting with gunpowder. Their engineers had grasped the basic principles of steam propulsion. Dwarf-forged steel was the finest in the world, and their intricate clockwork toys were the delight of elf children. Through the World's Edge Mountains, great fortified underground roads linked their underground cities. And actually they had steam trains that passed between them, which is awesome. Underground trains? That's so cool. Anyway, rumours of the Civil War had reached the dwarves, but they didn't really understand the situation. Reaving and kinslaying were completely alien concepts to them, and no dwarf would ever break his oath to his liege lord. Save for a few naval battles, the war had never reached the old world. Secure in their mountain fortresses, the dwarfs didn't give it a second thought. Such confidence was to be their undoing, and that of the elves. The Witch King of Nagaroth hatched a new plot. As the elves returned to the old world in strength, trade between the two realms grew once more. Malekith had been shown the secret trade routes of the dwarves during his period as Bel Shanaar's ambassador, and he now used the knowledge to his own benefit. Dark Elf reavers, garbed as warriors of Ulthuan, fell upon the dwarf caravans, seizing their goods. Naturally, suspicion fell upon the High Elves. King Gotrek demanded recompense from the elves. When word of this demand reached the Phoenix King, his reply was immediate and undiplomatic. He sent a message saying that the Phoenix King did not answer demands, but granted pleas. Dwarves were a touchy, proud race, and to suggest to a dwarf king he should beg for anything was almost as bad as suggesting he shave off his beard. King Gotrek sent a blunt reply to Caledor, saying he made pleas to neither elf nor god, and demanded twice the recompense originally asked because of the implied insult. Caledor sent his ambassador back with his beard shaved off, and said if Gotrek wanted compensation, he should come to Ulthuan and collect it. While all this was going on, agents of Nagaroth were abroad throughout the old world stirring up trouble. There could now only be one outcome. War. So guys, that sums up the Sundering rather well. And yeah, I guess we're gonna move on to the next chapter in the next episode. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this. I certainly did. And yeah, if you did, please do comment, like, and subscribe. It's always good to hear from you guys. And I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one, guys.